Okay, moving on. Next we have Michael Fern, who is edging to present his presentation. He's from Edge himself. Michael's going to talk to us about shifting the purpose and experience of the workplace environment. How can we learn from community areas, hospitality, other sectors to build a better experience? Please give him a warm welcome.
Thank you. So it's been really insightful this morning, and there are lots of parallels with everything that everyone said. So hopefully my slides will get less, and I'll try and flick through at a fair old pace. Just to put it into context, I'm not an architect, so I quite like a little bit of architects bashing. We don't just do things because they look nice. There are purposes and meaning behind everything that we're doing. And I think more than ever, that is something that is going to drive the future of what we call the place that work happens. I'm here talking today primarily around from an occupier perspective, but on behalf of those that create the spaces that we inhabit. So some of our work for landlords and developers, and really the important thing that they're having to go through. What I would say is obviously there's been monumental change for those landlords and occupiers over the last 18 months. Not only were they starting to be kind of weakened in terms of their amount of space, with the likes of co-working operators taking some of the things that would have traditionally been their own as tenants, but also then there's a global pandemic that happens and everyone cuts their leases down, serves notice, and we suddenly end up with loads of void space. I think it's something that we've seen in other markets, and one of the things that I do like to do within our work is often look outside our sector. This is not untypical within the retail sector and the high street in general, where the increased competitive edge that we get from more occupiers and more providers on the market means that we do have to think differently. And if you look at the retail banking sector, what happened over the last 10 to 15 years, it went for something which was really transactional. It was about the kind of across a counter. It was very much face-to-face. And the retail banking operators grew empathy with their customers. They became lifelong partners. They stood by their side. They looked at what was happening to them now and at key moments in their life and thought about things that could help them along their way. So it's no surprise then when we look at the corporate real estate sector that we have seen a transition and we have seen a shift in some of the language that's being used by those. So we have already seen that tenant and landlord have disappeared from their lexicon. And we are looking at the nature of tenants being customers. It's a service that people are buying. They have that right to withdraw that service at some point to go and spend their money elsewhere. Which means that rather than just landlords, which was very much on that transactional side of a relationship, it's becoming much more about that partner. So they're much more actively engaged in the working week of their customers within their businesses. It's also changing the nature of space that's being created, and this is where we've started to kind of get involved in some really interesting things over the last few years. If you take 22 Bishopsgate, it was built on spec, tallest tower in the city cluster. For many, the opportunity of a blank canvas, the Cat A space on the left-hand side is something where lots of those tenants and space takers within that building still want their ability to make their mark. But lots of them have sacrificed their front door. They've sacrificed their own name above their building for something else. And when you look at the amount of space that's given over to shared amenities and shared surfaces, there's something that's happened where there's a relationship where there's a greater cause that they're all stepping on board. We were fortunate enough to be part of the initial team working with Sir Stuart Lipton on actually developing what the strategy for those amenity spaces. Its occupants are 12,000 people if it's at full capacity. That's a small town. So what does that town need? And really, how can we create experiences that really do ensure that they're adding value to the overall proposition of the space that's been made? We've all said far too much this morning already about what's happened over the last 18 months. The truth of the matter is, I don't think there is one answer, and it's great to hear that we've got some real debate and discussion happening in the room. I think the interesting thing really is most of our time has been occupied in what people are returning to. And today, lots of things are around what is going to happen with that space. And I think really what we are trying to get to here is with such a collective awakening of hybrid working, is more of the motivation around why people are actually returning. So the notion of starting with why, and I'm a huge Simon Sinek fan, I can't claim this for myself, but rather than starting with the physical aspect of what it is that we're trying to define, we want to try and understand why we're actually defining it in the first place. I started life as an industrial designer, as a product designer, where we spend a lot of time in those early phases of work understanding need state, understanding relationship with products and experiences to define something that actually solves a problem. And actually, when we think back to looking at work, we've all realized that it doesn't necessarily happen in this place that we used to have to go to. So if we know that office is no longer the place, what will be the positive pull? It's not going to be the push that was required before. We must turn up at a certain time and a certain day. We might change those patterns to different days of the week, but ultimately it's not the same thing. And if you think about the statement that Boris Johnson made last week, what was it? Every civil servant needs to get off the pelotons and get back into the office. That's not really the motivation that's going to get anyone to move. It certainly wouldn't get me to do that. What we're realizing, and several people have talked about this today, is it's much more about the human aspects of work, less about the physical requirement of a desk and a place where people focus, because I quite rightfully, like most of you, can focus much more without the distraction of lots of Teams calls around me. My bedroom, or it's actually my prison cell as I refer to it now, is a place where I do most of that stuff. But one of the things that's important about physical experiences, and some of the experiences that we're going to talk a little bit more about today, is it's about engaging your full self. We're sensory beings. We've evolved over millennia to respond to certain things. We form memories faster. We retain information longer when we engage multiple pathways. Smell is something that's been underrated. And the smell of an office is what? Neutral. So how can we enrich those spaces? Some of our work for consumer-facing brands spend a lot of time engineering smell to be a very, very positive tool in creating positive memories. So really what we're talking to is about the why has got to be something focused around human interaction, human experiences. We're already seeing the space utilization change, and some of our occupiers are already talking about not up to necessarily 30% yet, but there are predictions of multi-tenanted spaces, creating more space which is down to shared experience. And that's really interesting because obviously when you're a large corporate occupier, certain things kick in, which makes it easier for do within your own demise. Over about 100 people, 150, it gets really economic to do food. When you get up to 250, you can create auditoriums and so forth. But when you're a smaller occupier, you seem to kind of suffer death by 1,000 cuts. You can't afford to do this. We can't afford to do that. Therefore, the idea of shared experiences or shared amenities becomes really, really central to the proposition that you might be interested in kind of spending your time in. What we're talking about in its broadest sense here is things which are defined by a common purpose. And really, I wanted to talk a little bit about the importance of brand. Now, for lots of us, brand might think of something as a recent phenomena, but actually the origins of brand start back over 2,000 years BC, when makers of pottery used to carve their name and put pattern work. And really, the origins of some of those brands was around the idea of honesty, quality assurance, identifying source or ownership, about holding someone responsible. And actually, when you think about what that allows us to do when we think about the brands in which we form affinity with now, we're really creating emotional connections with those brands. I was talking with someone there about they saw an amazing product, they just had to have it. It's an emotional connection. It's around creating something which is actually beyond reason. I think, what was it, Steve Jobs said, I know it's a good design when I want to lick it. You know, it's that thing. You've done something which has been engineered to the point where someone feels like they must have it in your life. No one at the minute really thinks about workplace like that. No one wants a corporate workplace in their life. So really what we're talking about here is creating big reasons why. And I wanted to think of the biggest reason why that I could think of. When Isambard Kingdom Brunel was thinking about the Great Western Railway, he set about a reason why, which transcended the practical implications of the fact that we were going to build a line between London and Bristol. He actually said that he wanted the passengers to experience the idea of floating across the countryside. And everyone universally understands that as an idea, as a purpose for its existence. That meant overcoming some of the greatest civil engineering feats, creating some of the flattest gradients, overcoming marshlands, all sorts of stuff. But there was a clear vision, a clear purpose about why people were wanting to do it. And actually, everyone aligned behind that purpose, and it was as successful as we now use that line today. I wanted to talk to you about some of our experience, and again, outside of sector, but looking at the implications for what might happen within workplace environments. So about a third to 50% of our work is for consumer-facing brands and high street names like Costa. And we were approached by them probably 4 years ago now to look at really reconnecting their brand experience with their core proposition. And that proposition is around inspiring the world to love great coffee. Very wide-reaching, whether you're a Costa fan or not. I mean, it's 11th year running, I think, now. They're the UK's favourite coffee brand. So it's not something that was necessarily undervalued within the customer state. But what we wanted to do is actually readdress the physical experience, not just a means of delivery of coffee, which is the what bit, but actually why people are visiting is to form a much more deeper emotional bond. The importance of that for a chain in a congested marketplace is, why would I go past a Starbucks, why would I go past a Pret to go into a Costa? This brand talks to me as an individual and creates something which I have affinity with. Its objective and mission: increase sales, increase revenue. They're things that we do measure ourselves on, and we do go back. Our brands live and die by that value. We were doing this work at the time that they were acquired by Coke, and I think it was 9.4 billion. So there's something there around the value of an organisation that has a clear understanding of its brand and its portfolio. So armed with this idea of inspiring the world to love great coffee, what we did is actually set about a series of experience imperatives. And those are things that when you undress the overall practical application of what you do when you make a cup of coffee, these are things that became an expectation of a visit to a Costa Coffee. They define some really functional bits, but they also define some really emotional ideas around what it was to visit a Costa store. These are about brand storytelling opportunities. And you think about the physical workplace, what better way of immersing someone in your brand? You're a corporate employer. You have a mission, you have a vision, you have all 5 senses to create an experience which immerses someone in your universe and in your world. So as a way of actually thinking about the purpose of the office of the future, it has to be something which is about a brand centre of excellence, and that's something that I wanted to understand with you, just to show how we've actually extrapolated that. So we redefined the palette, and obviously that's an interior designer's job, but actually embedded and imbued within lots of this, there are lots of storytelling opportunities, and they're conveyed through the quality of art. We commissioned art which talked about some of the stories of origin, the importance and connection with London. It's a London-based brand, and at the time we were flooding the capital with some new store designs. It also had its own opinion about things like the quality of light, the quality of sound that you get from the space, also the comfort levels and how that changed depending on who the customer type is. So when we think about customer type, and we've talked quite a lot around one size doesn't fit all in terms of the workplace environment and who inhabits it, we talked about that understanding at a granular level about what happens when we shift location. And these might be streets apart, or in this case, I wanted to show you what happens when we go from something which was a metropolitan area to a shopping centre. So it affects the capture rate, it affects the amount of beverages that are sold, it affects the dwell time, it affects the comfort level of seats, it affects the sound, and it affects the light. When we get to a shopping centre, the motivation is different, it's less habitual. It's more about carving a moment out of my day. That's an emotional connection with a cup of coffee. That's about sociability. It's about human connection. And it's about that softer environment. And as such, We crafted a series of spaces and space parameters that meant that the space could adapt and expand in different ways. Now, the level that a brand like Costa goes to is not something that we would expect to recreate within a physical workplace environment. However, there are some really clear insights. We set expectations about the time it takes for eye contact from entry to the front door. Do we ever design a corporate workplace reception where that has been one of the key considerations? But the impacts of that means that our customers feel welcome, they feel like they are understood as an individual, and that they feel like they're guided through the space. We re-engineered things like the counter, for instance, and the importance of that was to mean that we actually orientated things so people saw them more than other elements. We brought forward the barista. These do actually still make it by hand. It's not a one-button machine, and the coffee craft was hidden. So we really, really brought elements like that to the forefront. So really, we're thinking about that landscape that's been mentioned today, but actually that being a much more experiential landscape based on some of the things that we might want our visitors and occupiers of our space to understand. We thought about the emotional context of how to create seating, and again, that landscape came into play around moments to watch the world go by, calm moments for reflection, refresh zones, and express zones. And they captured this idea of what the seating should be before we actually went and found the seating. So we hit a series of trial stores, and those trial stores became very successful and then rolled out into what is now a global guideline for over 2,500 stores in the UK, and then out into a global guideline. But I just wanted to show you the expression of that and what that meant as a brand story. The brand had actually lost contact with the colour red. And actually, we realised that that was an important differentiator and a different cue. Although we reduced the amount of words Costa on the high street from, I think, 17 was the previous count on an exterior of a building, and I think we've got down to 3, haven't we? I think, yeah, maybe 4. But we also changed the ambience based on a different expression for different customer bases. So we used art as a way of expressing passion and creativity for coffee. So we used a series of watercolour artists or things like woodblock printing down in Brixton versus the other one was in Walton upon Thames. Did it work? And this is the important thing for our consumer-facing brands. And I would say that we always do try and do this for workplace environments too. Measure the success, and if it didn't work, listen and understand why. We were really fortunate and took some very valuable lessons from the first trial sites, and we created double-digit growth in Net Promoter Score. A Net Promoter Score is something that I would encourage you all to think about from your own employer brand. If you looked at Glassdoor and used that as a metric for who likes your workplace, I think it would change the way that we view physical space and the importance of it. So, would I go and recommend you to my colleague, my friend, or to a stranger? We saw double-digit growth in that. For a mature brand like Costa, that's huge. And we also saw sustained growth of like-for-like sales. In some of the biggest stores, that was multiples of 10. For a brand like that, that paid for itself. I think that's the value that we need to bring to this type of environment, and certainly a workplace culture, is understanding the value of physical space. And I think we've said already, it's not going to be about how many desks per square foot. So you may think it's easier for a consumer-facing brand to develop something which is around its purpose. But I wanted you to kind of show you some of the tools that we use behind the scenes to realise this is something that you should be thinking about. You may have a consumer-facing business, you may have a logo behind your desk, you may have some values that you've put on a brick wall or any other wall within your building, but we're creating physical experience that should resonate with everyone that walks through the door. So if you've not got those answers for your own business, these are the things that we would be encouraging you to ask. Where do I come from? What do I do? What makes me different? Who am I for? What am I like as a person? What do I fight for and what do I value? Those are really important aspects of creating a physical experience. And that once we're armed with that, we actually should be able to create something which adds uniqueness to the experiences we create. So when we think about a physical experience of a workplace, we often put them in a nice brief, we put that into an order, and it forms a stage 1 document and then a stage 2 rebate document, and it's designed and it's developed. What it's doing is listing some of the practical expectations of what you will need. But if you drive those practical expectations through something which is about your brand purpose, it creates differentiation across every one of those moments of interaction. It's nothing new within the hospitality sector. You think about well-performing spaces like Soho House. This is absolutely crafted to the nth degree. It is no accident that it smells like it does, that they know you by name. It's all within your grasps to be able to get hold of. So I wanted to finish by showing you something we've been working on with Great Portland Estates. Great Portland Estates had a property, 16 DeForest Place, right in the heart of Soho, down a side alley, a little bit forgotten, and everyone was nearing their lease break. Some had already served notice, and we looked at the idea of creating something which was about flex space. Now, flex space for all those corporate occupiers is looking at something which helps fill those void breaks, but also is that ability to flex. What's important and what we brought to that was actually understanding the customer and opportunity with that customer at a much more granular level. So their customer or their target customer was the first step out of co-working. It was growing up, it was about expanding, and everything that goes with that expansion. The need state, what are we going to provide as an answer, or why are we doing what we're doing, is about ease, it's about flexibility, it's about sociability, and about community. After all, they've grown up in the cool bits of the co-working bit. Not so much the kind of what your own space looked like, but the front of house, the free beer, the free coffee. They've had that in abundance. We established a direction of travel. And really this direction of travel, and this is when we're getting into white space, to blank space for new clients, it's difficult to necessarily write the brief about what you want to be. It's quite good sometimes to start by saying what you don't want to be. And for us, that often defines a series of things that we're going to head for in terms of a direction of travel. Once we got there, we actually established our purpose, and that was a no-hassle workspace with Soho attitude. And what you're starting to see coming through here is some of the visual equity that we'd started to develop, part for our own orientation, but actually it became so strong that the marketing and brand plan actually led straight out of this. It was one continuous process. It didn't change hands, it just actually grew out of this common purpose. So we developed a palette, and the idea behind the palette, it is still a co-working space in terms of its front of house experience. It's a collaborative zone, but actually it is about ownership over space. So there are some demises which still are ownable by tenants and the customers that they bring into the space. So there is an element of neutrality to it. We want people to be able to make their mark, but there's also elements of flair and style that should be synonymous with its location. We wanted this thing to feel like it was the right place to be. That's a brand expectation, it's a brand purpose. So when we laid out that journey across, this is the ground floor, it meant overcoming some really practical things. We managed to get rid of some fire compartmentation issues which were blocking some key sightlines and circulation routes. But actually what we did across those main moments of interaction, we articulated what the experience and the emotional value needed to be. So at your point of approach to the building, you've got the practical bit. It's the building identification. There's some sign somewhere that tells you if you're in the right location. We also needed level access. We sorted out some of the practical issues around the fact that there were cobblestones and steps up to the front door. But the emotional thing that we wanted people to start to think about was the anticipation. Has this got curb appeal? If I'm marketing this building, I want someone to remember this building. They might be going to see 5 in a day. So what is it that's going to stand out? We wanted to go with our best foot forward. I wanted people to kind of come out saying this looks like the right place to be. And that's an emotional mindset. It's not a practical application that we needed to think about before people had got through the front door. When we did get them through the front door, we wanted to kind of ensure they were hit with some sensory engagement. So the importance of smell, so the importance of the smell and the acoustics that went with things like the grind of the coffee became really imperative. It became a signifier that they were in something which was about sociability. And also visual connectivity. There are no barriers. This is a frictionless entry space. So you can walk into this space and you have direct line of sight and eye contact with someone behind that coffee bar and counter. Once you're inside the space, yes, there is free Wi-Fi, there's free coffee on the house, but you're encouraged to find a space that suits you, and the landscape of the furniture is, as you would expect within a coffee bar. It has a range of settings that's either from kind of quick express service right through to slow moments of interaction. And then the space itself, there's connectivity with an outside courtyard, and we did some structural alterations to mean that we got more penetration on natural light. So this space felt like it would evolve from day to night. It wasn't a kind of anodyne experience that had neutrality. It purposely had programmable lighting. We dealt with the front of house much more like a stage setting than we did do a formal application of something which was a necessity. This is the final shot as you enter the space, and we managed to deliver on all of those brand cues and brand elements. It certainly doesn't feel like a GPE reception to a corporate building. And that's something that we've really actively worked very hard to do. All the naysayers out there that just wanted to do something which got us there quick, we managed to bring round by the fact we were doing things which really, really added value to the whole customer-facing proposition. I wanted to quickly show you the marketing showreel. We launched this virtually through COVID, so March, April. There was the pre-launch work that happened. So there is a little bit of speaking. Hopefully it's not going to blow your ears off.
Welcome to a no-hassle workspace with Soho attitude. Let's get one thing straight. This is not co-working. It's the best bits of a serviced office, free concierge service, free refreshments, free meeting spaces, free Wi-Fi, freedom of where and how you work, but with added benefits. Exclusively yours. With your own private floor and your own front door, get ready to showcase what's important. Your company, obviously. We'll even hook you up with a muralist to brand your lobby. You'll have your own meeting rooms, breakout spaces, and kitchen. Because sometimes sharing a fridge with Jeff from next door just doesn't cut the mustard. Sorry, Jeff. James knows what we mean.
Moving into this space, I think everybody realised, well, we're a real business now.
It's thoughtfully designed, fitted, and managed. We have brought a developer's mentality to flexible workspaces. High quality, sustainably designed, expertly managed. Great for you, kind to the planet too. Our lovely community manager, keeps things running like clockwork. It's a wonder how the world went around without her. It's alive with technology. Stand right there for super fast Wi-Fi. Or over here, or here, or here. Actually, it's bloody good everywhere. And here's Sesame. There's not much that this little guy can't do. Contactless entry, environmental control, and stacks of free newspapers and magazines. It even tells us when this dishwasher is done. Clever cookie. Just careful who you give the controls to. Flexible lease term in one bill. The building's solid, but otherwise, we're pretty flexible. Choose your terms and tell us how long you'd like to stay. Signing up is easy, and everything's rolled into one monthly bill, making it hassle-free.
We didn't have to do anything. We could come in, we could get on with work. Our relationship with GP is perfect.
Owned and managed by Great Portland Estates. With us, you're in safe hands. We know you don't want to be anywhere near other people's hands right now. What we're saying is, we own our buildings, we take care of our buildings. We look after you, and we're doing our best for the planet too. So relax, you deal directly with us. There's no middleman welcome here. Oh, and did we mention it's in Soho? Slap bang in the middle of Soho.
So you hear the narrative, you hear the brand story, the continuity of that message coming through, right the way from the pre-design stages that we worked through, right through to the end deliverable. Whether that's for you, that's not the point. Whether you like the design, it's probably not the point either. It's less about the design, but more about the process of how we got there, and actually delivering something which resonated with their target customer base. The important thing for us, and certainly for our client, launched in the middle of one of the waves, I never which one, 2 or 3, May 21. We got the first customer signed up in the same month. and we're at full occupation by the end of September. So in terms of the proposition, it worked. It resonated with a target customer. And now the continuation of that is the fact that that customer team that's on site, the community team, are encouraging collaboration. There's usually events on a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday night, and whether that's something which is community-based or whether it's one of the tenants taking over that space for their own purpose, it's about that symbiotic relationship. They're keeping happy tenants by being more engaged in what those tenants are doing and what their requirements are. So from an occupier's perspective, we understand that as the developer, they have a much more important role to play. If we're defining why, really we've got to do something which really resonates with our customer base. The short answer probably with the why is they're ultimately trying to make money. There's nothing wrong with making money, but it's actually the result of doing something else, which is often far more complex, to make sure that we're actually parting with that well-earned cash that we've got. Ultimately, we're trying to raise awareness, attract a potential customer. We need to attract them as admirers before we convert them into customers and provide a great experience and entice them back for more. We need someone to build a relationship they're going to commit to. Ultimately, we need to get them to trust us, respect us, and treat and like us before they part with their hard-earned cash. And that's something that resonates. You know, those weren't fictitious vox pops. That is the first tenant that took the space, and they do genuinely feel that proud about the space that they have. So in kind of summary, yes, I've spoke quite a lot about the developer side, but there's a lot of things here which is about crafting experiences for people. And if the future of workplace has got to be about creating something which resonates with your employees, it's about understanding your customer, understanding your audience, and we don't think about the employees in that sense a lot of the time. They do a job for us, they work for us, but actually they could take their employment somewhere else, and it costs more to replace someone than it does to necessarily keep them happy in their job. Therefore, we've got to create meaning and relevance for the audience that we're working with, and that's where the purpose comes in. The purpose for us is about something that really does truly resonate. Define that purpose for existence and clearly articulate it. And really the kind of plea from our side is don't create spaces, create brand experiences for your customers. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. That was really good. We have a question online. I think it's more related to equity inclusion. In the Costa Coffee Shop design standards, did you consider spaces for staff as well? Because often they're overlooked.
Good point. There are staff spaces that are part of the space. I think we have had situations previously where we've increased the size based on the operation that they've done. It is a challenge because primarily the majority of the space is something that's given over to increasing revenue for the business. There's always a fine balance, but we do have to create spaces for them, yeah.
Excellent. Great. Any questions from the room?
Being a developer, I wanted to ask you, as people are becoming much more spiritual, have you ever been asked to feng shui a space before you do it in terms of...
Not feng shui, but having worked on with Lipton Rogers on 22 Bishopsgate, some of the things that went into understanding the ley lines on that site was phenomenal. It's next to a church, and on that church was previous burial site, so there's some really interesting and insightful things. We've not worked on things which have required anything to do with formally doing that, no. Good point, then.
Any other questions? I have one. Were there any examples in your work experience where retail learned from workplaces, the other way around? I'll give you the reason why I ask it.
Yeah,
I'd love to go into a Costa Coffee, but I can't take a call from there because of the background noise.
Good point. That's partially been designed. And actually, I would say that acoustics do matter. But we are purposefully creating spaces which feel like they've got ambience and atmosphere. And actually, as we've mentioned other times, is the pin drop silence is an absolute killer of experience. But yeah, motivations is different. You dwell too long, that seat has a value. We churn that seat 2 or 3 times in an hour, and that's a potential revenue model that they're looking at.
Absolutely. Excellent. All right. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Really appreciate your time.
Thanks.